Hello, I'm Paul Johnson at the University of Kansas Center for Research Methods and Data Analysis. This is the second presentation about R and Windows installation, and the first presentation was about R, Active Perl, and some R packages, and the second is about editors that work well with R and make the programmer's work easier. The first editor that I would describe for you today is called Emacs. Emacs is a famous, long-standing program in the open source community. It's provided by the Free Software Foundation, and it has been packaged for Windows by Professor Vincent Goulet, who's done a wonderful job. You can go to this website, and what you'll see is a chance to download Emacs. Right now it's 24.3, but you should download that and save the file. I'm keeping all of my handy Windows stuff in a particular folder. I suggest you do the same thing. So after downloading it, I'm going to right-click and choose Run as Administrator. And I accept the request to install the package, and I say Next. I accept the GNU license, which means that if I redistribute this software, I'm obligated to share the source code as well as the program. And I'm going to change the installation path because I don't like to have all of this extra distraction in the path. So I'm going to cut out the x86 folder and shorten the second part to just GNU Emacs. That's not necessary, but I find it convenient. And for the install, I'm going to change that to just GNU Emacs as well. I'm going to ask for a desktop icon and let it rip. So when the install finishes, you click the usual buttons, and there won't be any really exciting change. You'll have a Emacs icon on your desktop. I can show that to you. And when you go into your software folder where your R programs are stored, mine's under Documents, R Code, and you right-click, what you would like to do is say Open with GNU Emacs. This works for me because I've done it before, but it won't look that way to you. So let's choose Default Program, More Options, go to the bottom, choose Look Up for another app on the PC, go to the GNU Emacs folder, bin, where the program's installed, the executable, and choose Run Emacs. So now Emacs is associated with the file, and you'll see some of the benefits of Emacs immediately. In the options, you can tell by default it has highlight parentheses. It has it doesn't have the option to turn on cut and paste with Control V and Control X. I'll explain that in a minute. It still has the traditional Emacs where cut is Control Y and Control W is cut, and Control and paste is Control Y, right? So that to me is the way Emacs default there is a little bit confusing because it's so customizable. I've never really concerned myself very much. But in the editing window, the main point is that you do see color-coded symbols. You see the parentheses are electric, so they highlight when they match. And if we were to type some code, make, for example, a nested command, when you start typing, it will be indented appropriately. And when it's finished, you'll not only get the proper placement, but also the electric highlights. So that's one of the major reasons to use a programming file editor, is that your code will be facilitated. Because this is the base install of Emacs with no special features, I'm going to show you one of the quirks with Emacs and the program package ESS that's provided with it. You want to start R and interact with it. When we do that, It asks, what's our working directory? And notice it properly guessed where my documents are. That's good. When I hit enter, it's looking for R and it found it, and it started it, and it displaced my code buffer. Emacs calls this section a window. The content inside it is a buffer, and the whole larger element is called a frame. So if I want to look at the buffer where my code is, I can go to the other window, and now I can interact with both of these things at the same time. So let's ask R just one more time. Get WD to ask it, where does it think my documents are going to be? It says R code, which is the right folder under Documents. If I say list files, it will list files. It spots the things that I want to work with. In this one, I want to show you the example about the Excel spreadsheet and some other R code. If I go down to the code window again, there are several different ways to send commands into R. One is to click the arrow. Did you notice the session? The R session in the Emacs inferior buffer responded. We'll just run a couple more steps here. If you don't want to go up with the mouse and get the button, there are alternatives. The old-fashioned way is a double keystroke, Control-C, Control-N. In case you forget what those are, you can look those up in the menus. There's a reminder, and you see that the one I just used was Control-C, Control-N. There's also a shortcut provided with Emacs with ESS, and it's Control-Enter. Right. Now I'm not a particular fan of the Control-Enter choice as the default, and here's why. I like to have Emacs set to use the CUA mode, which means that cutting and pasting responds to the usual Windows highlight, Control X to cut, Control V to paste, Control C to copy. But you've already noted that Control C is involved in many of the Emacs Speak Statistics protocols, and so there's been a lot of futzing about to try and make sure that those things don't interact. The CUA mode also gives you this very handy feature for editing rectangular sections. Notice that when I did Control Enter after turning on CUA mode, I can treat this rectangle as a selection that I can cut and paste. So sometimes you end up in a situation where you have a long string of values that need to be deleted, and this is super handy. So I like CUA mode. Unfortunately, it obliterates the Emacs Speak Statistics Control Enter as a shortcut key to send commands into the session. But don't worry, there's a fix. I'm going to close this session out. No. Yes. All right. Now, in my notes, I refer you to a website where I keep configuration files. In the software favorite Emacs files folder, there's a file called init.el. If you download that and copy it into the directory in your user account that is already called .emacs.d, which was created by Emacs, then you can have some simplification of the process. At least you can get an idea of how you could customize Emacs, which is the main point. So I need to go into the documents that I downloaded, copy init.el. Now, sometimes Windows users don't realize that they can do this, but you just have to force your operating system to show you the files that you want to see. So let's look at under the View menu in the File Windows Explorer. Go to Options, and the first thing you want to do is go in there and unclick the option that says Hide Extensions for Known File Types, and you want to unclick Don't Show Hidden Files, Folders, or Drives. You do want to say Show Hidden Files, Folders, or Drives. After you've made those changes, then you can go look in your user account, and I'm just going to click on my user account name, and it shows the files that have configuration information. This is where we installed the R packages in the last lecture. Now Emacs.d is the place that's created by Emacs, and I'm going to paste the init file in there. And now I will show you the handy benefit that results. So when I go back to my R code, I right click. I say open with Emacs. Everything's good. Now when I click R, it starts R in its own frame. I like that. In addition, because it read my init file, it has the CUA mode turned on automatically. I have a few other special features. For example, open create is the common menu choice if you want to create a new file or open one that exists. Otherwise, you see something different in the base of Emacs. And I also have the shortcut key is enter return to send commands into the R session. One of the benefits of working with Emacs is that you're not restricted by any artificial restrictions. So let me show you an example of how that's important. Suppose I make a histogram with the data that we illustrated in the lecture number 1. So I'll make a histogram of the GPA data. Nothing very interesting. Suppose I want to look at that side by side with another histogram. I say dev new parentheses open and shut. It creates a blank device, and then I can say hist dat $age. So that new histogram is drawn on the new device. Now this is just a simplistic example, but it shows the main benefit is that you're free to see the information you want to compare without any restrictions imposed. And that's not always true within these various R environments. So I think that that's everything that's really important to understand about Emacs with ESS built into it. That you can start your code window, you have the benefit of a handy editor, and you can send lines into R one at a time. There are a number of other benefits from working with Emacs and R that make it much easier to build R packages, to do debugging, to fix problems. That's the reason that virtually every really serious R programmer I've ever worked with has either used Emacs or at least has quite a bit of experience with it. In case you want to learn more about Emacs with R, I do have a lecture about this. It's facetiously called Emacs Has No Learning Curve, and you can find it in my guides for the under the R course folder. The second editor I'd like to illustrate for you today is called RStudio. And the website for that is highlighted on the screen. We will open that up for demonstration purposes. The downloads are obviously separated by operating system, and you should choose to save the RStudio file. Now, I've done that already. So I'm going to right click and run as administrator. Say yes. Okay. It suggests to install itself in a nice clean directory that I like, RStudio, no spaces, no numbers. I say next. I allow the shortcuts to be created, and while it's working, I'm going to pause the recording. So after the installation of RStudio is finished, we go back to our document folder. We right click on the R file and we say open with, and hopefully you should see RStudio as an option the same way that I do. If you don't, go into choose a default program and find it. More options. Another app on this PC. Go into the RStudio folder, look under bin, choose this one. Okay. So when I right click and say RStudio, you'll see the reason that people like or hate RStudio all in a single glance. RStudio is restricted to a single tightly framed window with 4 parts. And although it's easy to see that you can look at your code, you can look at the R terminal, and as I'll show you in a minute, you can see the plot and you can see a review of the objects in the session. It imposes to me, almost claustrophobic restriction on how you can do your work. But let's say get WD to make sure that it picked up where we are. Note it's correct. And so it sees all the files that I want. Because sometimes users don't use a capable editor, they have to have a command at the top of every program that tells that program where its working directory is. And I find that to be fraught with error and inconvenient. Sometimes programs always start you in the documents directory, so you can issue a command to change the relative location of the directory, but still that's inconvenient. So I like this idea that both Emacs and RStudio notice where the file is, and they treat that as the working directory. If you want to step through the code line by line, there are 2 ways in RStudio. One is you can click this button that says Run. That's nice. We get the same output that we saw before, and we'll do it again. And then, if you want to continue without using the mouse, there's a shortcut key, Control-Enter. Notice that that's working. So everything is good. It has pleasant color highlighting. It has parentheses matching. It'll indent as we go. And it does this thing I don't particularly like of automatically inserting the closing parentheses. And it's not particularly great indentation because it's not consistent with the R guidelines that you should have 4 blank spaces here instead of a tab. But at least they do try to indent, and that helps quite a bit when you're doing programming. But that's not my major objection with RStudio. Let's make a plot, and then I will be able to give my big argument against it. The window in which you're allowed to present graphs is this restricted area, and so your graphs have to be shaped into whatever space they allow, and you can't detach the graph window from the rest of the R display. If you want the graph window to be bigger, you've got to sacrifice your code, or if you want to look at your code, you've got to sacrifice your graph, and I personally can't stand it. And here's another feature. Say you want to look at another histogram. You say dev.new. Oops, RStudio didn't implement that yet, so it's not possible. So for these reasons, I just don't recommend people use RStudio. Another really serious problem with it is that when people create graphs in this little area, and then they export it into a file, they end up with something that's not sized properly and doesn't fit right into their document. As we all know, when you save things to PDF from R, you really should create the device and then draw the figure so that the drawing is done with the size of the intended result in mind. If you do that, the fonts and everything will lay out properly. But if you force your drawing into this little shape and then you save it into a PDF, often it comes out looking horrible, especially when you have to size it up to fit on a piece of paper. So that's my objection against RStudio. Aside from that, I think it's perfectly workable. I don't want to save this session, so I'll say no, and I'll get out of it. Because Emacs is historically difficult to install or use because it doesn't follow some of the standards that Windows users have come to know and love, like Control-X, Control-V, Control-C for cut-paste, and so forth. RStudio has been popular as an install, especially for R novices, and it does have some pleasant features that you'll explore if you install it. But the editor for Windows only that many of the students in our lab enjoy is called Notepad++. And you can download that one from the notepad++.org. The key thing, though, is that it doesn't connect to R as is provided. Instead, you need to download an additional program called NPP2R. So let's go look at the Notepad++ website real quick. Oh, I got a bad cut and paste off of that. So when you arrive at their page, it's very obvious what you need to do. Click the big green download, no problem. Take the file npp633installer.exe. They couldn't make it any more obvious. And then after you've downloaded that, you go to your special place where you keep your valuable downloads, and you are going to right-click on Notepad++, run as administrator, say yes, yes, okay, yes, no problem, I agree. I'm going to cut off this x86 monkey business because it annoys me, but I'll leave everything else the same. Create a desktop icon. Don't mess with this app data business. Now, while this is going on, I suppose I should have mentioned when I install things, I use the right-click Run as Administrator. That's because it's the only way to make sure that your system knows that you don't intend to install this only within your user account. Now, I don't want to run that yet. The next thing I need to do is install NPP2R. So when you go to the NPP2R website, you'll see it's on SourceForge. SourceForge is a long-standing, very large project that was started by a Linux company before the year around the year 2000. I have some a project there, and have worked with many projects. The source code's available, and they also provide the Windows download, which you can see is called NPP2R 6.2. It doesn't necessarily have the exact same version number as NPP2R. So after that's installed done, then you right-click on it, say Run as Administrator. Yes, okay. I think that I'm going to leave this x86 in that one because I have a sneaking suspicion I would break something if I changed it. So it's been successfully installed on this computer, and one piece of evidence for that is that in the app tray in the bottom, you'll see you have an NPP2R window, and you can look in the settings, and you'll notice that in this one, I've already told it where my R home folder is. Sometimes it can't guess where R might be, and so you have to tell it explicitly. If you try NPP2R or Notepad++ the first time and it says it can't find R, this is what you need to do, because it happened to me. And you'll note here you can change the shortcut keys. So now that Notepad++ and NPP2R are installed, we need to go to the code window again. We're going to right-click, and the Notepad++ team is a little bit better at fiddling around with the Windows registry than the other teams. They always put a right-click menu item for Notepad++. So that makes that a very handy thing to start. And really, this is quite a bit like using Emacs or any other really good editor. It's got highlighting on the line you're editing. The matching parentheses are highlighted. Hopefully you can see them going red, and the brackets match. Let's see what happens for indentation if x less than 0, squiggly brace, I equals 7. Well, it doesn't have automatic indentation, but so that's a little bit disappointing. Emacs is better than that. 1, 2, 3, 4. It does have this handy illustration that shows where the matching braces are. So if your clause went on further, it would help you to spot where it's demarcated. So that's a handy feature. But if you end up using Notepad++, I think that you'll probably find it has many more features that I don't know about because I don't use it. But what we want to do now is settle our attention on one line of code, and we're going to hit the function key F8. Look, R started in its own separate window. So it sent that command through, and it's pointing at the data set. So I hit F8, it sends that line into R, and when I run dat, everything's good. Now the usual story, of course, that data set comes through with that funny name in the third variable and the distortion in the text of the first variable. So I fix those up, and then everything is good. So I don't have any objections against Notepad++ except for the fact that I can't use it when I go to Macintosh or Linux or FreeBSD or other systems, and I don't have any incentive to invest myself in an editor that's available only on one platform. But if you are resigned to using Windows as your way of life, then everything will be fine using Notepad++ with NPP2R, assuming that the teams that provide it continue to do so. Everything else will be fine. Let's just make a histogram to be sure. Yep. So everything that Emacs will help you to do, it appears to me Notepad++ will allow you to do. It doesn't have all of the other code editing and development features that Emacs has, but you can write code. It'll have some help on matching parentheses and color-coded keywords, and it's certainly better than the editor that R provides itself. So I'm going to quit there. Save the image. No. Get out of Notepad++. Okay. Nope, I don't want to save that. So what's the point? The editor provided with R is serviceable for only a minimum amount of coding. If you want to do any coding that involves anything complicated, you need something more sophisticated. I use Emacs. The smart people I know use Emacs. For some people, there's an easy install of RStudio, which has many convenient features. And I recently saw a presentation by a professor at Stanford who said he codes with Emacs, but when he goes to an audience, he sometimes uses RStudio because it conveys better to the audience. I think that if I were using only Windows, I might use Notepad++ just because it's a more coherent Windows-only style of editor. But because I want to be versatile to go across platforms, I use Emacs for Windows. Now, if you happen to use a Macintosh, you know that this is not really important for you because the editor that the Mac team has prepared for R is really quite nice, quite a bit like Emacs actually. But Emacs does exist for Macintoshes. You can use Aquamax. So that might be a reason for you to experiment with Emacs for Windows as well, because you might want to be versatile across platforms. That's what I have to say. I hope that this whirlwind tour is not too fast, but it does persuade you that it is possible to get a practical working view of Emacs, RStudio, and Notepad++ without killing yourself. And if you come to the Summer Camp Institute or you're in one of my classes, I'll be glad to watch over your shoulder while you try to install these things and help you get it done. Thank you very much. I am Paul Johnson at the Center for Research Methods and Data Analysis at the University of Kansas.